This video is an introduction to the procure-to-pay process at TransCanada, otherwise known as the P2P process. There's audio included in this video, so please put on your headphones and turn up the volume. The P2P process at TransCanada involves 5 roles: requisitioners, buyers, purchase order approvers, receivers, and accounts payable processors. The overall procure-to-pay process involves determining how the material or service is going to be requested, creating a purchase requisition, determining the source of supply, creating a purchase order, receiving the materials or services, and paying the vendor. If you are a requisitioner, you play a critical role in ensuring that the P2P process is executed smoothly. The information you enter at the requisition stage has a major impact on many other stages in the process. Let's take a closer look at the process. Determine method for request. So you need something. The first thing you should do is determine how to proceed with the request. Materials can be obtained in 2 ways. If it is a material that is stocked by the warehouse, then you would typically create a reservation in SAP and have the material issued from stock. Please note that reservations are only available through projects or work orders. You cannot make a reservation manually in SAP. If the material is not stocked by the warehouse, then you would initiate the process to requisition and purchase from a vendor. If you have to purchase from a vendor, you have 3 possible ways of creating a requisition. You will either create the requisition through a work order, through a project, or manually in SAP. Create purchase requisition. It is critical that you create an accurate and complete purchase requisition. An incorrect or incomplete purchase requisition can cause delays in the procurement process. It makes it more difficult for the buyer to process the request. It could delay your work or project, and ultimately, the vendor may not get paid. Refer to the requisitioner checklist to make sure that you have included all the necessary information, including a full scope of work. At the end of this training, we will provide a link to this checklist and all other reference documents mentioned in this video. If you select a fixed vendor, provide justification for it in the purchase requisition. Keep in mind that even if a purchase requisition includes a fixed vendor, the final selection of the vendor is done by the buyer. It is also critical that you select the correct master data in your requisition. Master data is the set of data in SAP which is used across the entire organization. Consistent use of master data allows TransCanada to manage its core data across the organization, helping to eliminate data duplication, for example, duplicate stock levels. It also helps save time with data entry and provides more accurate data for reporting. There are 3 types of SAP master data that are used in the P2P process: vendor masters, service masters, and material masters. The vendor master contains some data at a global level that is used across TransCanada, for example, the vendor name and address. The vendor master can also contain information specific to each company code and purchasing organization. The next type of master data is the service master. A service master uniquely describes each service. The service master includes a service number, descriptive text, base unit of measure, a material group, and evaluation class. A material master record defines a particular material, including its form, fit, and function. At a global level, the material master includes the material number, description, and material group. The plant level holds information that is specific to the plant, such as MRP settings, bin location, average price, and balance on hand for inventory items. It is very important that you select the right master data when you create a purchase requisition. Keep in mind that a material or service master is required on every requisition. This information is used to define material requirements, scope of work for services, qualifications, and spend analytics. If the master data that you require doesn't already exist, then you must request for it to be created. The process to create master data can take quite a bit of time, so make sure that you put in the request as soon as possible. You can learn more about master data in the SAP requisitioning courses. Once you have created the purchase requisition, it is routed in SAP to the buyer and supply chain, who determines the source of supply. Supply chain determines if it should be sourced from an existing or a new vendor. The buyer will also determine if an existing contract, a new contract, or a standalone PO are required. If a preferred or fixed vendor is indicated on the purchase requisition, supply chain considers it and makes a final decision on the vendor based on pricing, contract conditions, and other factors. The buyer follows specific guidelines in order to get TransCanada the best product or service at the best price. For example, the buyer obtains 3 quotes on materials. Keep in mind that quotes should only be obtained by the buyer. Also, vendor qualifications must be completed prior to any work commencing. Once the source of supply is determined, the buyer converts the purchase requisition into a purchase order in SAP. From the time that the purchase requisition is created to when it's converted to a purchase order depends on the nature of the request, but keep in mind that inaccurate or incomplete purchase requisitions can cause delays. Supply chain requires adequate time for sourcing, which may include negotiating terms and conditions and supplier qualification. One exception to processing time is in the case of an emergency. An emergency purchase order can be expedited. An emergency PO is one that is used during a time of real emergency, where the situation will imminently cause business interruption, property damage, or loss of life. A detailed process for emergency POs can be found on the supply chain page on InFocus. Once the buyer creates the PO, it is sent for approval through SAP. Who approves the PO depends on how much the PO is for and how the requisition was created. There are 2 types of approvals. The approval workflow in SAP is based on the authority to spend limit, or ASL of the approver. The authority to execute document, or AED, is granted to individual supply chain employees for purchase orders. The approver could either be the requisitioner for non-project orders, or the WBS element owner for projects, or someone in their applicable hierarchy. If the PO is for a high dollar volume exceeding $10 million, it's processed for approval through an exception process. Please note that the approval workflow is set in SAP and cannot be changed by the buyer. Only when the PO is approved can the buyer send it to the vendor. This is usually done by printing the PO from SAP into a PDF document and emailing it to the vendor. Now the materials or services are delivered. The next step in the process is to receive the materials or services in SAP. Posting the goods receipt is a financial transaction. Your project or work order gets charged for the materials or services at the receipt stage. Typically, the person who created the requisition also receives the materials or services in SAP. Keep in mind those materials being delivered to the warehouse will be received in SAP by the warehouse personnel. But what happens if the materials are not being delivered to a warehouse and the person who physically receives the materials or services is not the person who created the requisition? The receipt must still be completed in SAP. If it's not done, then the vendor doesn't get paid. If the physical receiver is not the same as the requisitioner, then these 2 individuals must communicate with each other to ensure that the receipt is completed in SAP. Another challenge can occur if the receiver uses the wrong transaction in SAP when entering the receipt. Please note that there are separate transaction codes in SAP to differentiate if you are receiving a material or a service. The receipt should be entered into SAP as soon as the materials are physically received or the services are rendered. For services, this could be triggered by the completion of a work ticket or timesheet. Don't wait until the invoice arrives, or there will be delays in paying the vendor. Once the materials or services have been received in SAP, this closes out the purchase order and signals to accounts payable that the vendor can be paid. In most situations, accounts payable performs a three-way match to verify that the purchase order, the material or service receipt in SAP, and vendor invoice are all the same or within allowable tolerance levels. If accounts payable finds a discrepancy, then the invoice is parked and remains unpaid until the discrepancy is resolved. This is the end of the procure-to-pay process. As you have seen, everyone has an important role to play in the process, but it all starts with an accurate purchase requisition. A breakdown in the process can occur if the purchase requisition is incorrect or incomplete. Better planning with supply chain management equals better results for your project. Engage your supply chain management professional early. The other critical step is the material or service receipt in SAP. This concludes our video on TransCanada's procure-to-pay process. Please return to the e-learning module to answer some knowledge check questions.